sometimes young people come up to me who very much do want to be in real estate and really want to have a job similar to mine someday and aspire to that. And I think that's really interesting. And they ask me, well, what would I do? How would I get there? I think if I tried to have this job, I probably wouldn't have it today. Instead, I think my path has been a little bit more about, I sometimes think of like a frog leaping from lily pad to lily pad. And I sort of just always leapt to the next right lily pad. And I ended up so many years later looking back, being like, how did I get here?
I'm Drew Lang.
I'm Robbie Arps.
You're listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Dan Parker, the co-head of new development for Compass, a real estate brokerage and services firm based in New York City. We hear from Dan about how working for Julian Schnabel led him to a career in real estate. We hear that he has come to believe that New York real estate is a block-to-block market and how critical it is for developers and their architects to align buildings with their specific location in the city. Dan asserts that today's sales drivers, above all else, are views and amenities. He discusses politics and taxes with us, among many other topics that touch the world of real estate. Here's our conversation with Dan Parker. Dan, welcome to the Brick and Wonder podcast.
It's good to be here.
So we'd love to start out hearing about your background and how it is that you came to start working with Compass. How is it that you even got into real estate?
I moved to New York in 1997 to go to school here, and I grew up way upstate. My town was like cows and cornfields and, small town life. And I was very excited to go to school here. I went to Fordham. And I wouldn't say that I set out in any way to do what I'm doing today. I majored in visual arts with a focus in film and video, and it was not my intention to end up in real estate. So after college, I had a good friend who was working for the artist Julian Schnabel, and I was very jealous of her job because she would come back and tell us stories about celebrities that she met and crazy parties that were happening and big openings. And I thought that sounded really glamorous. And she decided that she wanted to move to Vermont to be closer to her family. And I said, this is my opportunity. And at the time, I was very interested in film and video because that was what I was studying. And I thought, well, maybe Julian's a filmmaker. And I thought that would be maybe an interesting career path for me. And I did end up working with Julian for a pretty long time. And through that time, he developed his building on 11th Street into what today is called Palazzo Ciuppi.
Pink one.
The pink building at 360 West 11th Street. And what was interesting over the course of a couple years, the accumulation of all those small decisions. Well, how high should the fireplace mantle be? And, what are we going to do with the flooring? And what kind of tile is going to be in the bathroom? And seeing that those decisions sort of one day add up to a building was really exciting. That's probably where I got the building bug. And at the same time, Ian Schrager asked Julian to do the redesign of the Gramercy Park Hotel. And so the same thing was sort of happening. I remember we would sit down and we would work on every last detail because he even did all the furnishings of the building. So we would work on rugs together in odd shapes for the lobby. And it was exciting. I think that's probably where I said, I want to find a way to get involved in development. I want to find a way to get involved in these large projects and really see all these little decisions add up to something I can walk by and walk inside of.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so how long were you with the firm that was acquired by Compass before it was acquired by Compass?
Maybe 6 or 7 years. And now it's been about, I think it was 2019, I think it was just before the pandemic that Stribling was acquired. And yeah, I've been with Compass since then. I would say that there's been a wonderful evolution to the team. There are a couple people that I work with today that I've been working with since those early days at Stribling, but it's a much larger team now. We've really grown the team. We've grown the types of projects that we work on, working on larger and larger projects, project turnarounds that are faster, more exciting. So in many ways, the business has also grown by our partnership, our collaboration with great developers here in the city.
And what is that collaboration like? How would you describe it?
We get involved very early days, from the moment a developer is looking at a piece of land, to help them think about, what can we do with this? What are the opportunities?
For as long as I've been familiar with Compass, has sort of leaned into technology, I would say. In some respects, advertising it as a tech company, a tech-based platform for selling property. I'm very curious, from your perspective, how does Compass approach the market, particularly as it concerns development, decision-making, value creation, et cetera?
Yeah, it has to be a combination of data and experience, because if we look at the data in a vacuum, it'll be very, very hard to understand what to do with it. If I were to give a raw report blindly to a developer, or 3 different developers, they might all come up with very different conclusions about what they should build. We know the nuance of all of these buildings. We understand where it is, what might have impacted the pricing. Like I said before, maybe half the building looks into a dark corridor and the other half of the building is waterfront. And there are lots of nuance that you can't just see when you're looking at a dollar per foot number. We are selling off of plan for the most part. If we've really done our jobs incredibly well, we've sold 70 to 80% of the building before the first closing even takes place. So we're selling an idea.
Talk about some of the hardest things about the journey, bringing a property to market. And maybe give some insights into things people might not know about.
Here in New York, it is incredibly difficult to be a developer in some ways. In other ways, the only barrier to entry is capital. So it creates this very interesting paradigm.
What do you mean by both of those two dichotomous
So
elements?
you have enough money, you can purchase a site, you can hire some architects and some consultants and maybe a designer, maybe a brokerage like Compass, and work together. You'll figure it out. You'll get a building built. In that way, the barrier to entry is very low. It's just capital. The way in which it's very complicated is we're in a place where there are, in New York City, there are so many regulations, city, state regulations that define what it is that can be built, what opportunities there are for building, where incentives exist, some incentives that are necessary for some deals to even pencil out. You have environmental regulations, regulations from the Department of Building. They're just sort of endless issues to consider as you're getting to a plan to build. You're also working with what will be very long timelines. So if you want to build a tower on the Upper East Side, that might be a 5-year process from the moment of buying land to getting through a process with an architect and an interior designer and moving through what the state requires, which is an offering plan approval. Within this long timeline, you're taking an enormous risk. All kinds of things can shift and change. City policies can shift, state policies can shift and change. Buyer sentiment can shift and change. The market, world events, the way that we prioritize this type of purchase can shift and change. So I guess that's what I mean when I say it's incredibly difficult to build here in the city.
How would you describe the current vibe, for lack of a better word, for the types of developments that you work on in New York City? How is the market responding to these types of offerings?
I think when people think about developers, they think of 57th Street and big starchitect towers and outrageous pricing. And that does exist. That's not the part of the market that I'm so interested in. I'm mostly focused on more buildings that New Yorkers probably want to live in, which is family-sized apartments near very good schools. And really that will survive any type of market. And there are certain types of buildings, contextual, beautiful, classically inspired buildings that are really doing incredibly well in the New York City marketplace at the moment.
Are there types that are doing the opposite? Is there an archetype that tends to not survive and do well in New York?
I'll talk about one in particular. There's a group called DDG that I admire, and they've done some great buildings here in the city. And they're very much thought of as a downtown kind of aesthetic. And they did a building uptown, 180 East 88th, that I really like. It had great windows, had beautiful views. I think the proportions were really great. But when someone's going to pay Upper East Side dollars to live on the Upper East Side, they have an idea of what they want their life to look like and what that aesthetic will be. And it was not, I don't think it harmonized with that. And it was a long sellout. They eventually found their price. At the end of the day, there's a price at which everything will move. Sometimes the market moves to your price over time, but it was a longer process for them.
Where do most of these projects stumble or stub their toe in going from ideation to completion? What, in your experience, is the hardest part of getting one of these projects off the ground?
I think people don't understand how block to block New York real estate can be, especially for people who really live here and have lived here or even grown up here. I've been in the city for a long time, and I don't even understand. I've been here since 1997. I don't have the level of nuance for every neighborhood that someone who actually grew up here does. And it can shift and change over time, but how is 86th Street different from 78th Street and different from, there is all of this nuance. There are some projects, Upper West Side in particular is very different in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it's very different east to west. And you have sort of the Lincoln Center area, you get very good pricing around there. Obviously, you have 15 Central Park West, which is sort of that's really I would say, development changed at 15 Central Park West. There's development before and development after. But as you move up, there's some places where people assume because someone got a certain price in the 60s that they can get that on a building in the 70s, but it's so far west, or that they can get that on a building on West End Avenue. And some days I just want to say, yeah, we can get that if you just pick your building up and put it on the park. We're not always comparing apples to apples, and developers from time to time see the success of another building and do believe that it translates to an opportunity that they have. At the end of the day, understanding what something's going to sell at so that you can understand what it is you can afford to build. That's one of the incredible benefits of working with brokerage early days, is really having these honest conversations about value.
How to get everyone into alignment, I would imagine, is a big part of the challenge and the process. Everyone knows they need to be in alignment on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are natural tensions between, say, the developer, the brokers, the buyers on the end of the equation. Unless you get everything into an alignment, you're going to stumble. So let me talk to us about that. Do you all have any particular strategies that you found have worked well and maybe ones that haven't worked so well? Or is it just dependent on the people involved? It's always going to be dependent on the people involved, but what about the strategy side of it?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and it's one that I think about frequently, particularly when we're working with a new client. We're very lucky to work with a number of repeat clients where we really do have a shorthand and a lot of trust built. Finding that alignment is really important. It's easier when you've worked together for a long time. We tend to be very conservative in how we value something, and we think that there's great benefit to that. All kinds of things can occur between beginning, middle, and end. There are times when we've worked with organizations where the decision makers are overseas, and it is very hard to communicate the nuance of the market. I think that alignment is easier when you're working with people who understand the market and you can build trust with. I think that that's really important. And we're the first ones to say what not to spend money on. Every once in a while, we'll see a design and we'll say, well, that's going to be really, don't do that detail. That no one cares about that detail. No, that's just not that no one's going to pay you more if you have unlacquered brass doorknobs. All those small decisions, they add up. Sometimes we wish we had a ledger of all the places where we've said, no, don't spend money on that, so that we could later on say, but this is what we need you to spend money on. As an organization, we can be very helpful around directing the dollars towards what buyers care about. Not always what designers care about, not always what architects care about, not always what developers care about. One of the things a developer that I greatly admire says, we set aside our own personal tastes, our beliefs, all these things. We set it aside when we walk into this room to work on this building, because we care about what the market cares about when we're working on this building. That's what's going to drive the best outcome.
How do you think about just the economics of, the win-win scenario for you and your partners?
We will charge along the way monthly fees to make sure that we can sort of keep the lights on while we are helping to advise through the whole process. But they're very small in comparison to the payday upon closings. And because we do sell typically so much of the building before the first closing, once the closings come in over a period of months sometimes. Even for a large building, you might close over the course of a year or 6 months, and then the commissions do start rolling in. I see that there is a bit of a tension in that we are compensated on these transactions where the developers also a little more focused on velocity. Obviously, they have tremendous costs to carry a building, particularly after first closing, when they start to be on the hook for the building's taxes and common charges, et cetera. So there is a bit of a balance where the development team is looking for top dollar, they're looking for velocity, we're looking for transactions, but at the end of the day, we're all looking for a successful building so that we can move on to the next one.
What's riskier, coming out of the gate too high or too low?
I think you can always adjust up. Hitting the mark is very important. Too much can be just a little too much, can still be a big problem. I think a lot of people don't understand that pricing can be a tool to move through a sellout. Price increases are not always a hurdle.
What do buyers really want? What really drives sales? Like if someone's really winning, what are they doing?
I would say that today, the best outcomes are driven by views, buildings which can provide really, if it can be a view of Central Park or a view of the river, that has enormous value. It's amenities. There's been a little bit of a amenities race on who can get the most and largest and most impactful amenities into their buildings. We used to only see big amenities in very big buildings. We're seeing big amenities in more medium-sized buildings today.
What's a big amenity?
Swimming pools, cinemas, common outdoor space. We have a bowling alley. We want to make sure that these amenities are things that people, especially through a sales process, get really excited about. Imagine like being there with their family, being there with their young children, spending time together, having birthday parties, like that emotional connection to these spaces.
What role does PR play and things at the edges like styling?
So PR is interesting and a necessary part of the process. I would say that it's getting a little bit more difficult to get the press excited about things that we get very excited about in the industry. And in general, I would say that the real estate press is becoming more industry focused than consumer focused. But that said, things like social have just completely shifted the game in a number of ways too. We can just create content in a way, and there's an expectation that we're going to create content for these buildings that is very different than even 5 years ago. So always putting out little videos and little snippets, ways of interacting with an audience that becoming increasingly important.
How would you describe your view of the future of, New York City residential development, given all the different things that are happening right now concurrently, politically, environmentally, economically, globally? What do you see as the future 5-10 years of development? And what I mean by that is not what is the manifestation of 5 or 10 years ago in terms of pipeline coming to fruition today or in the near future, but what is the developer in 10 years going to start doing that you're seeing that is different than from now, if anything? And how is your group, how is Compass looking to align itself, its practice, its offerings, its platform to that future? Because New York City seems to always be developing in ways that even surprise me as a resident. And I'm curious if you have a view that is informed by all the activity that you're engaged in.
I think that the only way that we're going to get anything like scratching the surface of meeting the city's goals is by building and incentivizing builders, incentivizing developers to meet those goals. I wouldn't say that we've gotten there yet. I think that there's a lot of work to do to align private developers with the city's goals of building around affordability. I think that we need a lot more private-public partnership. Is not equipped to meet its goals alone. They just have proven again and again that they're not the best developer. But I think that there are ways in which we could create better partnerships. I am excited about some of the office to resi conversions that are occurring in the city, and Compass is very much a part of those. And they're still it's not, there are affordable components, but we're still talking about mostly building luxury residential. So I hope that the future is more alignment between the city government, private-public partnership, and meeting some of the affordability goals. I think that some of the goals that the current administration has set and the previous administration, courageous goals, but we're nowhere near on track to meeting them. So what do we need to do to change? What do we need to do to get in alignment? The future of our city can't just be luxury condominiums. Otherwise, we'll lose an aspect of the vibrancy that allows for those luxury condominiums to be built. It's all an ecosystem.
What about the contractors, the builders in the equation? Does your team get involved with them? Do you have any insights that you can provide to your developer clients with respect to
not as much. I mean, because our agents will frequently walk buyers through a construction environment. Sometimes people still need to look out a window and understand what their view is going to be, and they might get a chance to do that even before the building's enclosed, depending upon the developer's perspective on that. I do end up on a lot of construction sites. Our team ends up on a lot of construction sites. So we do have a sense of, from a sales and marketing perspective, is this a nice environment for us to take buyers? And sometimes it is. Sometimes the site is run incredibly well. And sometimes it is not, and sometimes it is not a nice place to be, and it's a less respectful environment, and there are funny drawings on the windows and in the elevator banks, and maybe it doesn't smell very nice, and so there can be very different experiences when walking on a job site. If we're going to bring buyers, we want to have a very nice experience. So I can say that we have spoken to developers about where we've had those good experiences and where they've been less good. So, but in terms of really getting in the nitty gritty of what a GC is providing, we don't get into those details.
What about some beliefs that you've developed over the years that run contrary to prominent, prevalent beliefs in the industry? What's one of those?
I think it kind of goes back to your question about the future of the city. I do think that we need a lot of different, I think the city is a bit of a stew, and we need a lot of different elements to be able to keep what we appreciate so much about the city going, that we can't just focus on one type of building. And I think part of that, it's interesting right now, there's a lot of talk about the pied-à-terre tax that was proposed by Governor Hochul. I'm a big fan of the governors and the mayor, and I appreciate a number of things that they're trying to do for New York. The pied-à-terre tax is, I guess when you say something that runs contrary, I keep reading these articles about the pied-à-terre tax, and they're always quoting some luxury agent about how awful it is and how the sky is falling. Well, the sky was also falling when we had the mansion tax, and when the mansion tax was revisited and increased, and so far, people still want to live in New York City. Is there a tipping point where Death by a thousand cuts. People say this isn't a great place to be anymore. Maybe. I don't think we're there yet. I also think that we are talking about a tax which, despite my admiration for the governor and the mayor, affects people who don't vote. I see Mamdani in front of 220 Central Park South talking about Ken Griffin's apartment in particular on Instagram and how we're going to tax the rich. It's an easy political sort of shorthand. If government really wants to get involved in a way that's going to allow for our city to continue to grow and meet all these goals and generate revenue, it's going to take massive property tax reform. We have like a very broken property tax system, which most people don't even understand how it functions, but it's based on assessments for most multifamily buildings. Anything that has more than 3 units is done by understanding what the potential rental value would be of those units. And because of that, it has created a lot of inequity. Someone who has a 1-bedroom condominium in Long Island City is probably paying multiples of the effective rate of someone with a $20 million co-op on Park Avenue. Townhouses pay very, very low taxes because there are fewer than 3 units. And the people who pay the most taxes are owners of small to medium-sized rental buildings. And those are the same people that we want to be out there offering affordable rates to people. So if we were really to get serious about shifting the city to something that's more fair and equitable, we'd be looking at property tax reform. But that's a harder conversation to have because there will be real winners and losers at the end of that conversation, and they'll all be voters. They won't be people who live in Florida. So if we want to be courageous in our politics, I think that that's something that I would love to see the governor and mayor take on.
There are 2 questions that we'd like to close with. The first one is, what's something that you're currently doing wrong, and what are you doing to fix that?
Hindsight's 20/20. I think that there are some things that it takes a while to understand what you've done wrong, especially in this industry. The decisions we're making are so far in advance of the outcomes. I would say we've been maybe a little too conservative at times in our assessment of a developer's opportunity. And there are an occasion or two where I think if we were not so conservative, this is a tough one. This is a really tough one because there are very good reasons why we're conservative. And the outcome could have been very different. And I could sit here and tell you we shouldn't have been so conservative. And in another universe, so many things can affect the process of a development. I could parallel universe be sitting here with you right now saying, well, we were far too aggressive in our assumptions. With just one change of city policy, one change in current events. If I could turn back time and have the timeline be exactly what it is now, there are 1 or 2 occasions where I wish that I could have said, I think your opportunity here is unbelievable, rather than I'm a little worried around how you are looking at this.
The last question that we have for you and for each guest is, what is one question, a thought-provoking question, that you would pass on to the next guest of this podcast, to the industry writ large?
There's something I really like about real estate in that it's mostly very clear. It's mostly very regulated. But there are lots of things that slip through the cracks. And one of those things, how much you pay for a property, is not quite as clear and transparent maybe as it could be. There are ways in which you can receive credits that are not recorded in a deed. There are ways in which you can, as a developer and a development team, change the perception of the success of a building rather than be super clear about what actually occurred. And I think that creates some real friction, and I think it actually creates inefficiency in the market. So my question would be, how much did you really sell that for?
So interesting.
Very interesting.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Sure thing. This was fun.
That was Dan Parker, the co-head of new development for Compass. Dan and his team at Compass continue to work closely with developers navigating the complexities, opportunities, and constant evolution of the New York City real estate market. Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, share it with a colleague working across the built environment, and subscribe to the Brick and Wonder podcast for more deep dives this season. The Brick and Wonder podcast is produced by Shayna Danziger, with sound engineering by Garrett DeBlock. The production staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Carrie Potter, Roya Osuli, and Alex Kozin. I'm Drew Lang, and you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.